We are live now, sir. We will
Okay,
start the
fine.
session.
Sure.
A warm, happy evening to all the participants watching out on the other side of the screen. I am Nirmal Kumar Jain, the founder of Law Gardener. On behalf of Law Gardener and team, I welcome Mr. Roshan Gopalkrishna, who have come here and gave their time from their busy schedule to share the knowledge and guide us on the topic legal career in sports industry. I would also like to welcome all the participants who include law students and lawyers and other common men. Before starting the session, I would like to introduce today's guest. Roshan Gopal Krishna sir is graduated from the NLSU Bangalore and have done LLM in sports law and practice from De Montfort University. Sir is partner at LawNK, a Bangalore-based law practicing specialized in sports, intellectual property, media and information technology laws. In addition to that, Sir is also the Chief Legal Counsel at Copyright Integrity International, a world leader in the protection of digital and broadcast rights. At CIE, Sir leads certified legal and technical personnel that provides high-quality rights protection and anti-piracy service to various stakeholders in cricket and gender entertainment content. Once again, I welcome you, sir. I
Thank
believe
you very
that
much.
I believe that everyone watching out there will be enlightened by your knowledge and will benefit them to start their career in sports industry. Also, I request all the participants to fill the feedback form during the end of the session. As now I will take over the session further. So basically, it will be a Q&A, and my question to the sir is, so okay, sir, my first question will be like, what about like how were the initial days in your uh, law college or and law school? So,
So I appeared for the NLS entrance in 2001. I didn't make it. I appeared again the year after and made it, I think, by the skin of my teeth. 2002 was probably the toughest entrance test in the history of NLS. To give you an idea of how tough it was, usually, it's a 200 mark test. Usually the cutoff is about 115 or 120. I'm talking about 20 years ago, so I don't know what the standard is now. I'm guessing it's much higher. But back then, if you scored like 60%, you were sure that you would get in. The year I finally made it in, the topper had scored 99 out of 200. That's how tough the test was. And I think I was literally the last person to make it. I was last on the wait list. So there's the merit list, and then there's five people on the wait list. And in the wait list, I was last because we had a bunch of people who were just, I think, on the same marks, right, on the entrance test. Because of which they just went in alphabetical order, and unfortunately, R came at the end of that list. Uh, but I think that my years in college were a lot of fun. It was definitely a big move up. I'd mostly studied in the smaller towns. I studied in Until that point, I'd studied in Bangalore for only 2 years of my life. I'd studied in other towns like Karwar, Hubli, Mandya, Mysore, Tumkur, Chikmagalur. So then coming to the big city and actually spending time there it was quite challenging. It was interesting but also challenging. Because you're never exposed to people from different parts of your country, right? You know that
yes,
Delhi as a city exists. You know that Bombay as a city exists, but you don't necessarily outside of unless you're family members, you don't necessarily interact with people from there on a regular basis. And it's quite a unique experience because I went to college in my first year. My roommates were one was from Delhi and one was from Darjeeling. So it was essentially Chikmagalur, Delhi, and Darjeeling put together in one room. You can imagine the chaos that would have caused. But there's also a quite, I think, deliberate just to get the students, to get to know each other better, and I think more importantly, get to understand different cultures, get to understand different people and their way of life. Uh, After that, I think the first few years went by without much of an event. It's only in my third year that I realized that maybe I need to do something more to even get better value out of the course itself. Uh, there was a point when I just thought, okay, so there are a couple of really important incidents which were completely in the outside world, but almost a butterfly effect kind of scenario. 2004, as a young Manchester United fan, it was quite heartbreaking to watch Roman Abramovich come and buy Chelsea because all of a sudden they had the best players and the best manager. But at the same time, at NLS there was a European law seat, when each trimester a professor from one European university would come and teach European Union law. And they would be pretty young. They'd be, I think, academics who are just starting off. They'd be readers, so they'd be around, in that not more than like 5 or 6 years older to all of us. And we used to play football with them. And one of them one day just got talking and they said, do you even know of these cases in that the ECJ has laid down about player transfers and the player transfer system as such. And we were quite surprised, right? Because you're only looking at football as something that happens on field. You don't really get into engage with what is happening off field. But that was interesting. Then you got reading more and more. The year after, I think, was when the Glazers bought over Manchester United. So the term leveraged buyout suddenly became very important in corporate law class. And that interest, I think, also led me to just try and at least approach the lecturers and the professor and LS and say, okay, there is potentially a sport aspect to the projects that we're doing in college, and can I work on something like that. So for international law, where we were studying international institutions, I requested the lecturer to let me work on the Court of Arbitration for Sport. For other topics like intellectual property law, for instance, I worked on ambush marketing, which surprisingly is a fair bit of my work currently. Sometimes you never know what you sign up for and what you actually end up doing are actually quite similar. And the professor who actually allocated this topic to me, still whenever I meet him, he still says, "Remember, I was the first one to allocate this topic to you, and now you made a life out of it." Uh, but I guess that also happened. The other major factor was the fact that NLS is very close to the Sai Center, which is located within Bangalore University campus. So while our new library was being built, we used to access the sports facilities at Sai. And it also meant that, whenever the Indian national hockey team, so hockey has been a game that I've loved for very long. I've never played hockey particularly well, but somehow I just seem to like the sport. And you could see, the national team players just running up and down that Nagarbavi slope. And you could bump into them at the shops at Nagarbavi. There were so many things where you could just meet them and they would be surprised that you would recognize them. But at the same time, the question you asked yourself was, okay, but these guys are also national team players. If these were cricketers, they wouldn't be able to walk down the street the way they were.
Yes.
And I think the motivation also was to try and work in sports law in India. So I think the aim was to try and combine those two aspects: a career in sports law, but also a career which would benefit the Indian sports system. And at that point, there wasn't much by way of actually experiencing sports law. Right? This is the pre IPL days. So even Indian cricket was centered around the one-day competitions rather than the T20 leagues.
Yes, sir.
So I ended up trying to intern with a few sports management organizations. So that kind of helped. One of the organizations I worked with actually were involved in uh, a very high-profile court case involving two cricketers, which is Yuvraj Singh and Zahir Khan. And surprisingly, it's something you'll study in contract law on post-contractual restraints in Section 27 of the Contract Act, on what kind of post-contractual restraints are reasonable, and if at all they are reasonable when it comes to individual contracts. So once a contract is ended, can you still tell someone that you cannot do something because you had a deal with XYZ entity previously, and that there is a
Yes.
right which is unreasonable for that right to still be in effect beyond the termination or the expiry of the contract. So that helped. I think I did 2 or 3 internships there. I managed to work with Godrej as well. They still obviously have a large consumer marketing division. Uh, and I also worked with a firm in Bangalore called MMB Legal, which at that point had a fledgling sports law practice. All in all, fun days, I think, but also it helped that I guess I could make some sense out of it.
Yes, sir. So, so what were the difficulties did you face in initial stage of practicing, like as soon as you passed, graduated, and you went into a domain which no one think about it, sports, okay, there is something like that. What were the difficulties, sir?
So I think when it comes to the domain itself, the fact was that people didn't know what it was. I think a lot of my family still doesn't understand what I do, which is okay. I've been in the field for 12 years, but my grandparents still don't know what I do. But which is okay. I guess it's just one of those things which was very new at that point. Uh, the difficulty I think was I didn't have the normal difficulties you associated with working, getting to work in a fresh in a newer area. So I had no financial obligations. I had no dependents. So at that point, it helped that it was my decision, and that if it didn't work, that eventually I could only blame the finger at myself and say, okay, this didn't work. You tried it, and if it didn't work, fine. You give it 2 or 3 years. Beyond that, if it hasn't worked, that you just move on. You start at A0 and at a bigger firm or whatever, something of that sort. So I had that level of clarity, and luckily I ended up working with someone who was also at that point trying to build a sports law practice, and we got along really well. I've been with the firm for 12 years now, the firm of Mr. Nandan Kamath, and I still
Yes,
consider
sir.
myself very lucky to be working there to 12 years from the time that I joined. Actually, I actually joined as a part-time employee because I had other commitments, and now I'm working here full time.
Yes, sir. So, sir, um, like, how can a person who want to start a legal career in the sports, how we can do? Like, what's your advice as you have the vast experience now? What will be advice to a newcomer, sir?
So I think the advice is going to be figure out what aspects of sports law really interest you. Actually, I'll take a step back. I think the larger question is, why do you want to work in sports law? It's I think it's very easy to say, I'm really interested in sport. I'm really keen on working in sports law because I have a love for football. No, that you're essentially there. You're saying you have a love for sport. Sports law is not even something you experienced, right? And it's uh, you still need to be good with your basics. There will be aspects which you're taught in college, for instance, which you need to understand. Your basic courses, like tort, contracts, even some other things like constitutional law, for instance, the famous case on whether BCCI is state. Administrative law. This is an issue that came up when the entire conflict of interest issue came up with the BCCI around 2014, 2013, sorry. And what you'll see is I think that there's sports law related aspects to essentially every subject that you study, and which actually gives you an understanding of what sports law is. It's essentially the application of general legal principles to sport, right? And there will be certain instances where there is what's called the specificity of sport, where I think courts worldwide have kind of recognized that sport is unique in its own sense. So, which is why you'll see things like if you were a lawyer at a firm, for instance, and you wanted to move to another firm, your contract could never say that you can move on only if the other firm offers to pay you at least X amount more than what your current firm is paying you. But that's something you will see in player contracts. It's something that you would find quite absurd in any other settings. But in sport, you look at the limited life of the athlete, and you say, okay, where can the athlete make the most out of what can be a pretty short career at the elite stage? Because while the money for elite athletes is large, you're also potentially one injury away from ending your career. And then other things, I guess, just things you'll study in IP law, for instance, uh, performers' rights, broadcast rights, cinematograph films. How do you protect all that? How do you protect logos, trademarks? And is every use of a logo or a trademark or footage, is that an infringement? What about fair use? So many, I think, different elements that you'll actually, the more you look out for these aspects, I guess, the more you'll understand that there's actually sports law and a lot more things that we study. I also mentioned law of contracts earlier.
Yes, sir.
So
So
as a
basically,
student, I'd say sort of recognize the subjects that are really important, even your dispute resolution classes, for instance. So if you're advising your client, inevitably there will be disputes, right? But so then you have the basics at least to advise on, how to take a matter to court, how to advise on an arbitration, how to, and I think for that matter, how to even know when to step back and say, okay, this is not something I'm an expert at. Perhaps someone else should be there, but I will obviously be with my client throughout. So that's I think some advice for students. I guess once you move on and once you're already working and then you want to move to the sports sector, the focus is just going to be on being a really good lawyer. I think there's no two ways about it. And this is sport is also one of those areas where you absolutely have to understand the commercial aspect as well as the regulatory aspect of the sport, because very often these are tied together, right? You'll see, for example, organizations like the BCCI, which are on one hand the guardian of the sport of cricket, but which on the other hand also have a commercial interest because they are operating leagues like the IPL.
Yes, sir.
So understanding then what the balance also is between those two roles. Uh, that's also the entire conflict of interest issue that came up, like on whether there's a balance and can you be a judge of your own cause in some sense.
Yes, sir. So my next question will be like similar to what you said. Like, is there any specific, as you told about general laws like contract, IP, copyrights, is there any specific laws or rules in the sports industry?
So there are specific laws and rules to give you an instance, and so I'll tell you why there's no national sports law in India. That is essentially because sport in India is a state subject. So which essentially means that only the states can legislate on sport, and which is an
Yes, sir.
argument that has been used quite often by states and even by governing bodies, saying that's why the government of India can't bring about any rules which govern all of sport. And we've seen many bills in the past fall by the wayside, which were ought to have been national laws in the country. So at the national level, there's the National Sports Development Code. We still have the 2011 version of the code, which is still being implemented, which talks about the manner in which national sports federations are to be recognized, how they are to function, their roles and responsibilities. A fair bit of corporate governance there as well. I think there's a specific form of entity that they're supposed to have a certain number of members, the way of functioning. You need to have audited accounts presented to the government. You need to show how funds are utilized. You need to show how many members you have and things like that. At the state level, I think states again have their own, make their own policies, or sometimes even bring about legislations. But very few states have actually brought about legislations. I think they've gone more the policy route. Karnataka itself has had a Karnataka state sports policy, uh, but again, that depends on the extent to which the government really want to control sport. The other aspect really is that sport traditionally has fought back against any form of government interference. So this actually tends to go, and this is something you'll find in the International Olympic Committee's charter as well, on how government interference is not to be encouraged, and in fact even resisted to an extent. Uh, it seems to have its origins in the 1936 Olympics that Hitler used for political propaganda, but which essentially were a state enabled Olympic Games, which end up being a platform for the Nazis and everything they wanted to show to the world. And I think that's something that the governing bodies even here keep doing, right? The moment that the government tries to step in, they say this is interference. But I think interference and regulation are two totally different things. And every form of regulation is not necessarily interference. You could you could say, okay, this is the way to do things, but that's not necessarily interference because maybe you're not doing something you're supposed to do as an organization that's incorporated in India.
Yes, sir. So, sir,
So
as you
each
mentioned,
sport, yeah, this one.
eh,
So each sport also has its own unique set of rules. Obviously, there are the more on-field aspects of it, which are the playing conditions. The code of conduct for players, for officials, for staff, for umpires, and things like that. Which again, as I said, is more the regulatory or guardian side of sport. But even the private leagues now, right, they have their own set of rules and regulations for the participating franchises, right from the drafting of a participation contract, which tells you what rights you're given, to what you actually can do with those rights, and even down to the some very nitty gritties like what is the logo you can use on your jersey, for instance, what is the size, what is the font, what is the size of the logos you can put on each spot on your jersey. I think each IPL jersey, for example, has about 10 spots on it. So the rules and regulations obviously also keep changing with the change in time. So the basics remain, but I think especially on the commercial side, the rules change pretty much year on year.
yes, sir. So, as you mentioned about the state policies or state legislation, some state legislations are there. So, are that much effective, or there is need of some changes in that?
I think it depends on how the manner in which states have used them. Some have used them to set up their own state sports authorities. I think Tamil Nadu has done that. Uh, but eventually, look, it's also a case of competition between the governing bodies and the state governments and the government actually at every level. because even nationally, right, it's the government of India which is represented by the Ministry of Youth Affairs and Sports, which in turn runs SAI, which in turn runs many of the national sports facilities, like all your stadiums in Delhi and instance. Because many, I think most of the governing bodies don't really own their own stadiums or their own training facilities. They're all government property, unlike I think in other countries. And you'll see the same thing for flow down even at the state level. Even in Bangalore, like the Kantirva Stadium, it's owned by the ministry. It's then leased out to the Karnataka Olympic Committee and others for use under specific terms.
Yes, sir.
And that's why I think inevitably you'll also see how there's been confusion about ISL matches taking place in Bangalore. I think there were instances where BFC, for instance, didn't have the pitch ready because a few days before the match was supposed to happen, there were other state level events taking place and things like that.
Yes, sir. Sir, my next question will be like, as a law, after is a practicing means it is a litigation. So, what will be the scope of litigation lawyer in the sports?
So I'd say it's a larger bracket than litigation lawyer. Let's just say it's dispute resolution lawyer. So a lot of the work we do actually is at our firm is just purely commercial. So it's transactional advisory, drafting contracts, giving advice to clients, providing opinions. But on the other side, I think there's a fair bit to say because inevitably you hear of selection disputes. There are other which result in one athlete going to or being selected for a particular competition, but not someone else. So then again, going down to the basics of administrative law, right? If you put down a proper procedure for say selection, have you followed the procedure that you put down yourself? The functioning of these sports bodies themselves, and also I think there will be some amount of commercial. There's anti-doping, which is a big part, advising athletes on when you find that there's a banned substance which has been found in their system, and obviously commercial disputes as well. I think sponsorship deals going bad, many of the other things, player contracts. So there's, as I said, there's obviously you need to understand both sides of sport to be able
Yes,
to do well.
so there is an international regulation for the doping, or there will be a state or national rules for that, sir.
So for doping, there's the World Anti-Doping Agency, which prescribes the rules to be followed worldwide. So that the rules start off with every year in January they actually come up with a new list of banned items,
Yes,
and essentially it's then a global standard in terms of what athletes need to follow, right down to any level where there is testing. So those rules are global; they're uniform across the world. It's just a question of how hard you want to enforce them, and then at what level do you also start educating athletes? Because that's the major challenge, right? It's for example, what is banned is a particular chemical.
yes.
It's not a particular drug that is banned. So, and there's absolutely no way you can provide the worldwide brand names for a particular drug. And very often, I think in even in India, for instance, now while you are required to provide a prescription for many drugs, the fact is you can still go to a medical shop and ask for any drug, and you just get it. So while anti-doping, the standard is very harsh. The standard you will study in taught is it's strict liability. If it's found on you, it's up to you to show that you didn't know that it was in your system. And there have been instances, I think, of cyclists, Alberto Contador, for example, who was a very, very famous Spanish cyclist, also won the Tour de France, who tested positive, and to figure out where the banned substance came into the system from, they even went out and identified his entire chain of food, right down to the farm where the stuff that he was eating was actually grown or was actually being processed. So while that's something only even elite athletes can get into. For others, it's very, very tough. I think we've seen the case of Indian athletes themselves, right? Narsingh Yadav in the 2016 Olympics, entire dispute with Sushil Kumar, and he kept Narsingh Yadav kept saying that his food was contaminated.
So, sir, my next question will be like, as India is one of the upcoming country in the world of sports, So how can we as a lawyer see an opportunity to escalate in this field?
I think what we still so obviously the elite end of sport, which is where you'll see all the professional leagues, you'll see athletes like Sindhu and Neeraj Chopra and others. They obviously, if they want, have access to legal assistance. Uh, but I think it's at the grassroots where you actually also want junior athletes, for example, to be comfortable with understanding the contracts they're signing up for. Because increasingly, what is going to happen is that I think brands and organizations will look at signing up junior talent. So you then grow along the way with them, and if they really make it big, you have them with you, and you can then potentially make you can do well based off their success.
Okay.
But that also means that because you're supporting a child at that age, it is also very likely the child's parents will just sign whatever is put in front of them. So I think the industry also will really take off only once even legal supply or legal support, for example, reaches the grassroots. Just like we talk about identifying talent at the grassroots and supporting it all the way up. I think there's something similar that needs to be done even for providing support at the grassroots, whether it's smaller clubs, whether it's NGOs, whether it's players, to also just get them used to knowing that there's it's good to have a lawyer on your side, and it's also good for them to know what they're signing up for.
Yes, sir. So basically, the main work of a lawyer is to advising that athlete. So what are the deals and how to associate with
As
the
in
brands?
advising the different stakeholders in sport, not necessarily the athlete. You could start right from the government to down to the athlete. Think of it as a waterfall, right? It's there's always one body on top. So you could, for example, in you need the government, you need the national governing body, you need the state governing bodies. There are teams, there are leagues themselves which actually separate from the teams and separate from the governing bodies. There are the players, there are the support staff, there are all the brands who are investing in the teams and the players, there are the brands investing in grassroots. And also I think trying to make them understand how it's you also need to watch out for the issues that come up, but also trying to make them understand what the entire ecosystem works like, and not provide just one perspective.
Yes, sir. Sir, can you like to share any cases which you dealt and which was very historic and high profile case? You can hide the names, but yeah, you can tell anything.
Mm. There was one we worked on earlier this year, in fact, in January. I think you also find some posts about this on LinkedIn. It was about a player transfer between our client Kerala Blasters and between and ATK Mohan Bagan, which is quite unique because we worked on two different players. Were going from One was going from Kerala Blasters to Mohan Bagan, and the other was coming from Mohan Bagan to Kerala Blasters. And there were two separate transactions. And what you often end up is doing is that with player transfers, the in football the rule is that you need to test the player for fitness, for medical fitness, before you can actually sign the player. And I think this was one instance where the player's fitness was called into dispute after the transfer had been concluded, and the player was in the possession of the other club. So that was quite a big moment because we actually managed to get a favorable order from the AIFF Player Status Committee, which looks into disputes between clubs on player transfers and also other disputes. That was one. I think the we also advised the ICC when they had a dispute with Indian news broadcasters about 10 years ago. It's a reported judgment. It's ICC versus NDTV, Delhi High Court. So you could look at that. So we were just working with the ICC and identifying and going through evidence which suggested that news broadcasters in India were actually exceeding the boundaries of fair use of broadcast content, and were commercializing content and things like that, which all of which goes against the spirit of fair use.
Yes, sir. So, sir, is the current demand for the lawyers in the sports industry is being maintained in the India or it's depreciating, sir?
That's a tough question to answer. I think The industry definitely needs more lawyers, but you also need to look at the entities who are investing in sport and who actually need assistance with sports law. And if you look at sport, it's pretty much the same organizations which are investing in a lot of the major sports. Right? It'd be Star, it'd be Reliance, it'd be RPST, which is the Sanjeev Goenka group. And very likely that I think for in doing all this, they'll also have the one set of lawyers across all their sports businesses. So while you will find that that there's a requirement for lawyers, or rather potentially there should be a larger requirement for lawyers. Sport again is still seen as an industry where you're still trying to justify the cost of the lawyer, right? Especially if you have a legal team, your initial response is going to be, okay, why do I need a sports lawyer when I have a team of lawyers? Any lawyer should be able to do the work. But I think increasingly people are becoming aware that there is a specialization called sports law, and that for any high stakes transactions or any high stakes deals, that they're open to seeking out firms and saying, okay, can you help us with this particular transaction or with this particular project? Especially, I think you coming back to your question of what were the challenges initially. I think there still remains the challenge of trying to show that you're adding value to your clients, and which can take like many years, right? If you can, because your client will still most of the times look at you and say, okay, but I'm just paying additionally for this. But to show that you're actually going out of your way and that you actually care for the client, I think this is one industry where you actually have to be quite proactive in actually showing that you're trying to deliver value. Because otherwise, it's a role that anyone else can do, right? It's not rocket science. It just is that all of us work in sport primarily because of a love for sport, and luckily things have fallen in place. But it's nothing that no one else can do. So it's
Yes, anyone can do if they're willing to do in the career.
yeah. I
Like,
think just
okay, they
willing to
want to
learn.
choose that
It's the same
career.
with any field. I guess if I were to change track today and say I want to now do litigation, I have to go into that market saying, okay, I won't directly go to a litigation firm and become partner because I'm partner at LawNK right now. I will have to actually start at A0 level because I know very little about litigation.
Yes, sir. So, my sir, next question is there. Is there any diploma or certificate courses or any degree in the sports law, sir?
So there are, I believe, a couple of specializations in India now, which are certification programs. You should be able to find them online. I've just heard of a few. I haven't really taught at these courses or even joined up for any of them. But internationally, yes, I think it just depends on which sports system you probably most relate to. So obviously there are options of doing LLMs abroad. There are some sports systems which are very relevant to the work we do in India, purely based on the legal system. So those would be UK and US. But based on the sports leagues in India, what would be the most relevant actually is a US LLM, because what you need to know is understand the franchise structure better for sport, and that's not an easy answer at all. It's
Yes, sir. So, as you mentioned about the ICC World Cup, you advised them. So, I want to know how was your experience while associating with them, sir?
so we worked with the ICC for about 12 years now, starting with actually starting around the time I joined in June 2009. We started working on the 2009 World T20, which is happening in England at that point. And 2011 was very unique because the event was happening in the subcontinent, and with a lot of the matches being held in India. So what we were able to see, I think, was so we were the official law firm for the ICC for that World Cup. So, and what we were able to see is, apart from advising them on the legal aspects of contracts, of doing business in India, of protection of their intellectual property rights, actually seeing what we put down in writing in action, I think, was more important. Uh, uh, Especially in Bangalore, I think for the 2011 World Cup, I had to be present at pretty much every match because we were doing this scan of the outskirts of the stadium, just to ensure that no competitors of the ICC's brands or any other brands not associated with the ICC were distributing products that would be carried into the stadium. It's a practice called ambush marketing. But that was quite unique because many a times, right, as a lawyer, you put into a document and then you don't know where it's gone after that. But yeah, it was nice to see the practical impact. Also, I think take away many learnings from it.
So basically, you like whatever the terms have been written in the contract, you also look upon the practical aspect whether it is been
Yeah.
implied or not.
And there
So it's
actually the document most relevant is your ticket, because the back of the ticket has many terms and conditions in very very small font which people never read. If you paid attention, many of the you would actually see that many items can't be taken into the stadium. Many of those things which people just tend to forget. And then the
sir, if they take,
2014
what
World
will
Cup, I
happen, sir?
actually went. Sorry.
If they take the items, what will happen, sir, if it is banned in the stadium then?
No, so you can't enter it without surrendering the item, or if you don't want to go, if you say no, I want to take it, you're not allowed to enter the stadium. So your ticket essentially it's not a right of entry, it's a permit to enter.
Okay.
So because it's a private property, right? Your stadium or whatever,
Yes,
it
sir.
could be built on government land, it could be maintained through government funds, but also doesn't mean that for private events anyone can just come in. It's like entering a restaurant where you see a board saying right of admission reserved, right? It's the same thing. Just because it's open doesn't, and it doesn't mean they have to take in everyone.
Yes, sir. So, like, can you give some examples regarding the ticket thing? As many of them don't know what will be that.
So very often, what happens is that you have the official sponsors for events, right? So it'll be just to give an example, it's the Vivo IPL, right? That's the Vivo is the title sponsor for the IPL, which means that what Vivo has is a bundle of rights which they can use in relation to the IPL. The most important one being that the IPL will be called Vivo IPL, but you're also allowed to give out uh, certain items, for instance, inside the stadium. So you'll have one particular stand named the Vivo stand for the playoffs. You'll have branding on all those LED boards. You'll have branding on many on the on the field of play itself, where either physically or digitally. So what happens is that now, since Vivo is the official sponsor, right, it also means that no other mobile brand can officially tie up with the IPL. So they obviously opened, they can go and tie up with the teams. Which is not an issue. But many often brands just don't have the budgets to tie up either with the IPL or with the teams, or don't want to. They don't want to spend that amount of money. So what then happens is you'll find people trying to get the most mileage because they just want the logo to be seen, right? That's all in it, which is in it for them. So they'll, for instance, give out these caps for spectators to carry into the stadium, because if you're distributing 100 of those caps and it's one group of spectators who are coming in wearing those caps, it also means that the moment the camera goes there, there's visibility for that brand which actually shouldn't be there, because that brand really has no right to be visible during the broadcast. And this is what you're talking about is a concerted effort. So this is not about someone just wearing a shirt which says Oppo, for instance, and just walking into the stadium. It could just be Oppo's gone into apparel. It could be a genuine Oppo shirt, or you work for Oppo. But this is more, I think, where there are concerted efforts. You'll find billboards, for example, being put around the stadiums or being put within the stadiums. So the aim is to ensure that no rival brand ambushes an official sponsor. And there have been many, many famous instances in the world. I think Coke and Pepsi in the '96 Cricket World Cup, for instance, Coca-Cola was the official sponsor. But as a 13-year-old, I still remember those ads which Pepsi played, throughout the tournament, and it just said Pepsi, nothing official about it, right? But they just had the best cricketers who took part in that World Cup appear for them in those ads. So it's a very fine line. I think we've seen something similar even recently with PV Sindhu and her agency sending notices to 15 brands for moment marketing, right? So ambush marketing is, I'd say, very, very similar. You're trying to essentially improve your visibility based on the happening of a particular event, or event here, I mean a league or a tournament, but where you're trying to capitalize purely on the buzz that creates, and it's even easier to do on social media now. I think more than the physical threat, the threat has now all moved virtually.
Yes, sir.
You want to ensure that these brands don't use your official IP, for instance. That again is a right you reserved only for your sponsors. So many different layers to it. Obviously, the more generic the advertising gets, the lesser cause of action that you will have. But even getting a competitor to move to a more generic space in terms of the advertising is a win in itself. At least you've then protected your event IP and the rights you've given to your sponsor.
Yes, sir. So, like my next question will be, sir, does there any specific books if someone wants to know like what are the sports law, how to know understand that? Is there any particular books upon that, sir? Can you name them, sir?
So there are books. I think I can share the list with you once this ends, because there are actually a few books right from India itself. Justice Mudgal has written one, uh, but otherwise I think there's you could look at the UK or the Australian books, but they're very expensive. I think the book I bought is some £90 after discount. But it also shows you the level of detail, because it's. Let me see if I have the book somewhere. Can you give me 1 minute? I'll
Yes,
just
sir. Yes,
get the
sir.
book. Just give me one second.
Yes, sir. Sure, sir.
I don't know if you can see it properly. Yeah, it's called
Yes,
Sport,
sir.
Law and Practice by Lewis and Taylor. And this is how thick it is, and the pages are really thin.
Yes, sir.
It's about, I think, 2,000 pages, but incredible amount of detail. And it also, I guess, the it shows you just how far the sports law system in the UK has evolved.
Yes,
And
sir.
hopefully, I think our legal system will get there. It'll take time, but
As the time goes on, it will improve on that.
yeah. But also, I think you need more and more sport to grow. You need more and more uh, issues to come up, and that's why, as I said, it helps if people are more literate, right? It's obviously, if there are more disputes, it's better for the lawyers. But even otherwise, just getting people aware of what their rights are is a big win in itself. Otherwise,
Yes, sir.
people just sign any contracts that are put in front of them without understanding the implications of what they've signed up for.
Sir, a question is there from participant. Are there any laws or rules like for governing the sports like IPL, Pro Kabaddi, or maybe soccer or any other thing, sir?
So these leagues are obviously in general governed by Indian law, and this applies at various levels, right? So while there's no specific law which will govern any of these professional leagues, the with the IPL, for instance, each of the franchises in 2008 they signed franchise agreements with the BCCI, which tells them what they can do, what they cannot do, right? But even that is it's governed by Indian law. So you for example have to set up a company which will operate only your IPL franchise and which can undertake no other business. You have to provide audited accounts every year. You have to register your trademark. So as I said, it's principles of general law being applied to sport, but with
So
each
it
year,
is.
and I think with sorry, go on.
Yes, sir. Sorry, sir. You can go on. You
Yeah.
can go
So,
on,
but
sir.
with yeah, okay. But with each year, the BCCI also puts out regulations which tell the teams what they can do, what they cannot do, when it comes to sponsorship, when it comes to the operational issues and things like that. So a lot of it, because it's a private league, right? A lot of it is driven by the promoter, who in this instance is the BCCI, and there's no specific law as such. The principles of Indian law will apply. I think competition law has come into the fore quite a bit when it comes to especially these franchise-based leagues. So, for example, is the BCCI actually stopping fair competition from emerging purely by telling their sponsors and their broadcasters that they won't approve any other league, similar league, from taking place?
Sir, a question like, is there any full-time job opportunities for law students in the sports?
I think internships are available full time. Obviously, you just have to, I think, graduate and, as I said, focus on becoming a good lawyer. If you have an interest in sport, just start reading up on it. There are some fantastic, resources. There's a website called Law and Sport, which actually I think even has a student section to it, where students can access some part of the website for free.
Sir, does sports law include the law like relating to the gaming, maybe online gaming, sir?
Yeah, yeah, it does.
Yes, sir. So, sir, like NCLT or NGET, that National Green Tribunal, is there any tribunal for the disputes in the sports?
So globally, there is one. It's called the Court of Arbitration for Sport. It's based in Switzerland. But that apart, at the national level in India, there is none. So right now, each governing body, for instance, as I said, I mentioned the AIFF Player Status Committee. So a lot of the disputes in sport are governed within the sport itself, or
Okay.
they decide within the sport itself. It's only if there's a matter which is outside the competence of the governing body's ability that matters will go to court.
So basically, it will be with the civil courts only, sir.
It depends. It depends on the types of cases as well. Sometimes I
Yes,
think
sir.
in selection disputes, in players go directly to the high court. They file
So
a writ
like,
petition.
okay. There is a question from a participant. There are many sports, traditional games which attracts all types of generation. But why don't we have in law syllabus yet? Because parents are or even life partner don't encourage until they achieve.
I think it's an opinion. So,
Yes, sir. It's
but
just
as I said, I
opinion.
think we will see more and more of it even in the law curriculum. They definitely have people offering these courses online, offering lectures on sports, not just lectures, like entire courses on sports law online.
Yes, sir. So what all the work the sport lawyers do, sir?
So from our perspective, most of it is transactional work, which means preparing documents, contracts, and the things like that, providing opinions, writing memos, providing advice. So all of it translate to structuring a league, for instance, or structuring a particular transaction. And I think for lawyers, especially, there's a lot of options in terms of the work in sport. You could do policy work in sport. You could do rights protection work. Look after copyright infringement, ensure that there's no infringing content on websites like YouTube, for instance. You could work with NGOs. You could do a lot of writing work, original research on gender issues, for instance. I think for the potential for lawyers in sport is actually a lot, because purely because of the level of training that you receive, and the kind of courses that you will study. But obviously, there's going to be one, and disputes. I forgot, sorry, and disputes as well. But obviously, on one aspect, which will be one of these, and the others will be allied. But it helps to have an understanding of the complete ecosystem.
Yes, sir. So what are the basic skills required, sir? Like particular skill sets to be a sports lawyer, sir?
I think that the first one is primarily just to be a good lawyer. So you know your basics well, and you know how to apply your profession, right? And once all of you
Sir,
also
there was
start practicing with.
sorry, sir. There was some network glitch in the middle. Can you continue once again, sir? Like whatever
Yeah,
you
yeah,
told.
yeah, yeah. So as I said, the focus is on just becoming a good lawyer. You obviously need your theoretical basis to be very solid in terms of understanding your theory from everything that you studied in college, and which is good to know. uh, but more importantly, it's on how do you apply what you know. How do you, for example, if you know that uh, coming to the question of intellectual property, right? You know that a trademark has to be registered. But registering a trademark, is only one part of the answer to actually protecting the trademark. Registering means you're showing ownership, but there are also people out there who are who could be potentially infringing your trademark. What action you take against them? So I think looking at things from a holistic perspective, as a profession, I guess uh, lawyers, advocates, you're all seen as, oh, there's a standard format. These people just fill in names, fill in age, and the contract or the document is ready. It's something you'll come across once you also start working. But the fact is, each lawyer also has their own set of documents, right? And you created it that way based on your experience or what you've seen in terms of the transactions that you've been responsible for. So keeping an open mind even to each transaction, no matter if you could do the 100 thing, or you could do the same thing 100 times, but each time you still need to open the document, read through it, and say, okay, it was still the same as last time, but at least you have to put in that effort, because the 101st time it could be different. But if your mindset is one which says, oh, it's the same contract, there's nothing else I need to see. So I think curiosity is very important. You need to ask yourself and your clients a lot of questions. It can be incredibly annoying, but the more information you get, the better you will be as a lawyer, because invariably there will be gaps. And the more questions you ask, the more data you get, the more information you receive, you'll be able to draft things better.
Yes,
You
sir.
need to have obviously an attention to detail, and just be willing to, I think, just put in the hard work. There's one side of this field, obviously, is the glamorous side. Someone you could say, okay, someone is a sports lawyer. You assume, he's just having dinner with Sachin Tendulkar and sitting, in the BCCI box at IPL matches. But while that could be a part of it, that I don't think that should be a major motivation for being in the field. That's a perk,
Yes,
right? You will get there because you're doing the other stuff you're supposed to do. You're doing it well.
yes, sir.
So
So
you
like
have
it's
to, I think, just focus on building your reputation and saying, okay, this is having that ego, saying this is who I am as a lawyer, and I have to do X, Y, Z to 100%. Obviously, not everything's possible to 100%, but do your best before the document leaves your system.
yes, sir. So along with the sports law firm, are there any other organization which provides internships for the students in the particular in the sports domain, sir?
Uh, I think the corporates who invest in sport obviously will have a sports department. You could look at Star, for instance, or look at Reliance, JSW. So there are also the sports marketing and sports management agencies. The agencies that actually manage the off-field careers of athletes. So these are the people who go out and get endorsements for athletes, get to go out and get commercial deals for them. I think definitely a lot of opportunities there, because there are many such organizations, and especially Indian sport. I think football is going to be one space which is really going to take off. So there will be player managers. I think that's not something we've seen to a large extent in with the cricket, because a lot of cricket is again driven by what each individual board does. But in football, actually, it's more player power, because players get to choose which club they go to and who they sign up for and for how long. And there are many
Yes, sir.
NGOs working in sport at different levels. The organizations like the Go Sports Foundation, the organizations like UA, for instance, which works with which uses sport as a tool for social good.
Sir, as we know, like Lionel Messi left that Manchester United, so basically that contract cannot be renewed. So what was the term, sir? Like it can't be renewed, sir.
So the problem with Messi was that so Barcelona would have exceeded their wage cap, which is imposed by the Spanish league, right? And it's also part of the fair play principles imposed by UEFA. So with Messi, I think even though he took a pay cut, and a significant pay cut, it was still not enough for them to register his contract, because he wouldn't. They needed other players to move on, and and La Liga would not allow them to register their highest paid player until they actually automatically came into that bracket. in terms of the players who they could register for the league. So even after Messi left, right? I think most recently Gerard Piqué and Jordi Alba have taken significant pay cuts just so Barca could register the other players that they wanted: Memphis Depay, Sergio Aguero, Eric Garcia.
Yes.
So it's an issue of, I think, this being overpaid, and then so Barcelona is a club that has apparently just spent $1 billion or €1 billion in the last 7 years. So obviously, all that is going to catch up with you at some point, right? Because it's a balance between not only buying players but also telling players to move on. Not telling players, but like I think being able to sell players. But the fact is that you also bought players for you bought them for a high amount, and then you're paying them a very high salary, which I think if you're which the players will know that if they go to any other club, they won't necessarily get that amount. And under the FIFA statutes, you can't force a player to leave. So neither can the player leave on his own, and or neither can the club force you to leave. So in which
Yes,
case, there's
sir.
nothing you can do as a club. You're just stuck.
Yes, sir.
Essentially, I think it's a case of bad finance management, and but I don't think they ever thought it would get to a stage where Messi would have to leave. And again, the wage cap is calculated against your overall revenues, right? And for the Spanish clubs, if you look at the last year and a half, there's been a significant hit because there's been zero ticketing revenue because there was no spectators in the stadiums. So that ceiling itself for what you could have spent and what you should have spent comes down automatically.
Yes, sir. Sir, my next question is like as Coca-Cola and other branding, how it is promoted in sports, and Cristiano Ronaldo, Coca-Cola scene, like what which happened recently in the news and it was very high issue. How can you frame any like is there any legal issue in that, sir?
Yeah, it definitely is. I think Coca-Cola for the Euros was what is called a central sponsor. So they had to deal with UEFA, right, to be a sponsor, either UEFA sponsor or a sponsor only for Euro 2020. Which also means that they are entitled to have those bottles displayed at the press conference because it's great branding, right? You have Ronaldo and there's Coke and there's a Coke bottle in front of him, and he's not obliged to drink the Coke. So it's a little strange because it's not like he was expected to consume it. He just moved the bottles purely based on his personal beliefs, which I definitely felt was a little excessive. But and players are I think
Hello.
there was some. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. We can hear you.
Yeah. What was the last part you heard?
Sir, you were discussing about this Coca-Cola and you were telling about other things, like how it framed. Like there was some big issue. Like you also felt that it was not good that he did the.
Yeah,
He
I
was
think
not
there
obliged to
definitely should
drink.
have been some form of sanction because you need to also look at it from the brand's perspective, right? The brand is investing in sport, and they're not telling the player to consume the product. So what's the issue with just letting those bottles be there? Because players also they also have a success in they're also crucial to the success of the tournament.
Yes, sir.
He could
So
have easily
like,
kept those bottles and then I think got his own bottle of water and had it. There shouldn't have been
sir,
an issue at all.
any fine would have been imposed on that whoever the organization was or on the Lionel
Yeah, I
Messi.
think the contractual remedy would probably lie against UEFA itself because Coca-Cola's contracts will be with UEFA, right? And UEFA would have said we will ensure your bottles are displayed at the press during press conferences. So
Yes, sir.
and technically, and they would also been required to ensure that the players or anyone who turns up for the press conference complies with that requirement of ensuring that they don't impair Coca-Cola's rights in any way. So they definitely should have I think fined Ronaldo.
Yes, sir. So we have a question from the participant side. The question can have your opinions, like what type of steps can be taken to add the sports in law syllabus?
Hmm, this is a tough one. I think some colleges have started offering sports law credit courses, single credit courses. But apart from that, I think it's also going to come down to how open our educators are about recognizing sport also as a field of study. So it helps that certain universities also have dedicated sports law research centers. But otherwise, I think it's also down to each professor at each at your college, right? It is definitely, I think sport is one way of making many courses interesting. And one of the things that actually helped at NLS was the fact that we had lecturers who were open to exploring sport. And there's a lot of
Yes,
literature
sir.
now, right? Even in your law courses, especially for the integrated law courses, the 5 year law courses. If you're studying, for example, a BA LLB, there are now so many books that are just around the sociology of sport, the history of Indian sport, economics of sport, on political science, nationalism, and that's just the BA part of it. Like the LLB part of it, obviously you go down to more of the core issues that we've discussed. But you can definitely look at topics like constitutional law, administrative law, competition law, where there is a sports aspect, and worldwide it's been recognized that the sport is to be given. It's recognized as a unique field. So the question of whether your normal rules should apply to sport, or if each sport is unique and therefore should be left to its own devices. So maybe even encouraging younger students to write more on sport. If you're a student and you want to, I guess you have projects to submit, then are there projects you can write on which are related to topics on sport? So I guess the interest has to come from both sides. And there are quite a few blogs as well now. Just at least for younger students, I think much more opportunities just to connect with sports and sports law.
So basically, it should be from the both sides, students and the or university side, that they should be interested in to study the sports law.
Yeah.
So, sir, as we have completed all the questions, sir, and there are no more questions in the YouTube comments also. So we will be my last question will be, sir, like what will be your advice to the youth, sir, to grow up in this field, sir? Maybe in the legal career or any other thing, sir.
I think I'll stick to just the sports law career and just say that to just focus on, don't get carried away by what you think the field is. So experience, all that the law has to offer, whether it's your corporate internships, whether it's your litigation internship, your dispute resolution, anything else. Experience your internships before deciding on what career may be good or bad for you. Don't make your decisions before you experience what else the law has to offer. And also, I think at the same time, focus on becoming a good lawyer, irrespective of what your personal interests are. If you're, it's very easy to say, oh, I'll be a very good lawyer if I work in sport. But the converse to that is, why will I let you work in sport if you're not a good lawyer? Right. So I think the basics are the same for any career, I guess, in law. It's about putting your head down, understanding what you want and what you're willing to do to finish that work. But if you're not a good lawyer, I don't think you can choose any field, but if you're not a good lawyer, it won't necessarily work for you. You need
Yes,
to
sir.
understand that there's an equal amount of hard work in pretty much every field. And the hard work there's hard work and there's boring work as well. Not every sports law related project you will work on is necessarily going to be 150% interesting. Like your client will call you up and say, okay, I have for the matches we played at this stadium, we engaged 50 security personnel. Do we need to pay EPF on the amount that we paid to the agency? Right? That's not a sports related issue at all. But to your client, you're a lawyer. He's not looking at you as a sports lawyer. He's saying, okay, I work with him on sports law matters, but he's a lawyer. End of the day, so he should know this.
Yes, sir.
Why she should get
So
me the answers. I think those basics will keep coming at you from all sides.
So all the basic things should be like a lawyer should know along with the sports matter. He should know every other aspects of the
Yeah,
law.
yeah,
So whenever someone approaches him, he should not say like, okay, I am a sports lawyer and I can't deal upon that.
yeah, yeah. Even and you can say, okay, I don't know, but then the expectation will be that you will bring them the answer, which is fine. I think it's quite okay to say, okay, I don't know this answer because it's not something I work on regularly, but I will get you the answer.
Yes, sir. So okay, so there is one more question. Does LawNK is providing any internship opportunities for the students, sir?
Yeah, I think you can visit our website lawnk.com and just go to the internship section, and the process should be laid out there. It's a little complicated, but we also want to see if people want to put in the effort to apply.
Yes, sir. If you want to, if you can simplify those, sir, for our
I
participants.
think just showing it's a long document. I think I've forgotten what it there also. Just give me 1 second. Let me just open our website.
Yes, sir.
It's a highly selective program. There's an eligibility criteria as well to see if people are eligible to apply. So it consists of a cover letter. Firstly, you should have finished 3 years of a 5-year program or 2 years of a 3-year program. Then we need a covering letter, a resume, an introduction video, and original writing samples. And the application needs to be made at least 3 months in advance.
Yes, sir. And I think all the participants will try to apply it for the internship. And now would like to conclude the session. Uh, I would like to conclude the session by thanking Mr. Roshan Gopalkrishna sir for providing us time from their busy schedule and giving us the wonderful and practical insights from their own experience in the sports industry. And I would like to thank all my team for making this webinar successful. And I also like to thank all the participants for participating in this session. And also do take the vaccine and be safe from the corona pandemic. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Nirmal. Thank you, Yashwant.
Thank you, sir.
Bye bye.